The morning fog still clung to the Wiltshire countryside on March 14, 1938, when the first production Bren gun rolled off the assembly line at the Royal Small Arms Factory in Enfield. It was 6:47 a.m. and the night shift supervisor, a man named Harold Pembridge, signed the completion certificate with hands that had been shaping metal for 32 years. He had no way of knowing that the weapon he'd just approved would be carried into every theatre of the coming war, that it would fire millions of rounds across 4 continents, or that German soldiers would prize it above their own squad weapons. The Bren didn't begin as British at all. Its origins lay in Brno, Czechoslovakia, where the ZB version 26 light machine gun had been developed in the late 1920s by Václav Holek. The Czechoslovak arms industry had quietly become one of Europe's finest, and when the British Army began searching for a replacement for the troublesome Lewis gun in 1931, they tested weapons from around the world. The ZB version 26 outperformed everything. It was accurate, it was reliable, it didn't jam when mud got into the action or when temperatures dropped below freezing. But Britain couldn't simply adopt a foreign weapon. National pride demanded modification, and practical concerns required adaptation to British ammunition and manufacturing standards. The name itself became a hybrid. Bren combined Brno, where it was designed, with Enfield, where it would be produced. By the time the first trials began at the Hythe School of Musketry in Kent during the summer of 1935, the weapon had been re-engineered to fire the British .303 cartridge, modified with a distinctive curved magazine to accommodate the rimmed ammunition, and prepared for the kind of precision manufacturing that would become its defining characteristic. The tolerances were extraordinary. Each component was machined to specifications that seemed almost absurd for a weapon meant to be dragged through mud and sand. The barrel was manufactured to within 0.002 of an inch. The bolt assembly required grinding and hand-fitting that took skilled machinists nearly 4 hours per weapon. When production managers at Enfield proposed loosening the standards to increase output, the chief inspector, a stern Scotsman named Andrew Macpherson, reportedly told them in the summer of 1939 that they could loosen the tolerances when Jerry loosens his. The precision stayed. This obsessive accuracy had consequences. A Bren could hit a man-sized target at 600 yards when fired from a bipod. Soldiers who trained on the weapon at the Small Arms School in Hythe before the war began could place single shots with rifle-like precision, then switch to automatic fire without the weapon climbing off target. The slow, cyclic rate of 500 rounds per minute, far below the 1 to 200 rounds of a German MG-42, meant that the gun stayed on target between shots. Veterans would later recall that you could count the individual rounds as they fired. Bup, 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 not the tearing canvas sound of German machine guns. When the British Expeditionary Force landed in France in September 1939, they carried Brens that had been in service for barely a year. The weapon had been issued at a scale of 1 per infantry section, replacing the Lewis guns that had served since the previous war. Many soldiers found it heavy at 22 pounds, awkward with its top-mounted magazine, and slow compared to the belt-fed weapons they'd seen in newsreels from Spain. Lance Corporal Thomas Whitaker of the 2nd Battalion, Royal Norfolk Regiment, wrote in a letter dated November 3, 1939, that his section thought the Bren looked like someone had put the magazine on upside down, by mistake. That opinion would change dramatically by May 1940. The Wehrmacht attacked through the Ardennes on the morning of May 10th, and within days, the British and French armies were being driven toward the Channel. At the village of Le Paradis, near the Franco-Belgian border, on May 27, 1940, soldiers of the Royal Norfolk Regiment fought a desperate rearguard action. Private Albert Pooley, who survived the subsequent massacre by German SS troops, later testified that their section's Bren gun fired continuously for nearly 40 minutes as they held a farmhouse against repeated assaults. The barrel was changed 3 times. The gun never jammed. When they finally ran out of ammunition at approximately 3:30 p.m., the weapon was still functioning perfectly despite having fired an estimated 1,200 rounds in conditions of desperate close combat. The evacuation from Dunkirk between May 26 and June 4, 1940, saw thousands of Brens lost on the beaches and in the retreat. British industry faced an immediate crisis. The army needed to be re-equipped, and quickly. Production was ramped up dramatically. The factory at Enfield went to 3 shifts. New facilities were established at the Monotype Corporation in Redhill, at the Singer Sewing Machine Factory in Clydebank, Scotland, and at the John Inglis Company in Toronto, Canada. By the end of 1940, production had reached nearly 1,000 guns per week across all facilities. But it was in the Western Desert that the Bren truly proved its worth. North Africa was a nightmare for automatic weapons. Fine sand infiltrated every mechanism. Temperatures in the summer of 1941 regularly exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade, and there was precious little shade to be found. Oil turned to sludge or evaporated entirely. German MG-34s, superb weapons under normal conditions, suffered increasing stoppages as the desert campaign wore on. The Bren, with its simpler gas operation and easily removable parts, kept firing. At the defence of Tobruk, during the siege that lasted from April to December 1941, Australian troops found that they could maintain their Brens even in the worst conditions. Corporal James Gordon of the 213th Battalion, writing in his diary on August 19, 1941, described how his section would strip and clean their Bren every evening after stand to, using nothing more than an old toothbrush, some diesel fuel, and a rag. The gun was so simple that you could disassemble it in darkness by feel alone, clean every critical part, and reassemble it in under 10 minutes. This simplicity wasn't an accident. It was designed into the weapon from the beginning. German soldiers noticed. Intelligence reports from British Second Army headquarters, dated November 1941, noted that captured enemy personnel consistently praised the Bren's reliability. One German NCO, captured near Sidi Rezegh on November 23, 1941, told his interrogators that his unit had been issued several captured Brens and that they were preferred to our own weapons for defensive positions. The curved magazine made the Bren instantly recognizable, but German units didn't care about appearances. They cared that it worked. The quick-change barrel system was perhaps the Bren's most significant advantage in sustained combat. Unlike belt-fed weapons that could fire continuously until the barrel overheated and warped, the Bren was designed around barrel changes. Each gun came with a spare barrel in a canvas case. When the barrel grew too hot, after about 250 rounds of sustained fire, the gunner would simply lift the carrying handle, twist the barrel lock, and pull the hot barrel free. A cool barrel could be installed in roughly 4 seconds. Experienced crews could do it in 3. This meant that a Bren could maintain steady, accurate fire indefinitely as long as ammunition and spare barrels held out. The British 8th Army demonstrated this during Operation Crusader in November 1941. At the battle for the Sidi Rezegh airfield on November 21st, positions held by the South African 5th Infantry Brigade were attacked repeatedly by German and Italian armour and infantry. Bren gunners went through barrel after barrel, maintaining such accurate fire that several German tank commanders later reported they had believed they were facing anti-tank guns rather than light machine guns. The distinctive sound of the Bren, that slower, deliberate rhythm, became something German soldiers learned to recognize and respect. When Japan entered the war in December 1941 and British forces faced catastrophe in Malaya and Burma, the Bren went to the jungle. Here was an environment even more hostile than the desert. Humidity approached 100%. Rain fell in torrents during monsoon season. Rivers had to be forded, swamps crossed. Rust formed overnight on any exposed metal. The Japanese Type 96 and Type 99 light machine guns were well-designed weapons, but British soldiers consistently reported that the Bren outperformed them in jungle conditions. During the first Chindit expedition into Burma in February 1943, columns of British and Indian troops marched hundreds of miles behind Japanese lines. They carried only what they could pack on mules or on their backs. Each column had a section of Brens, and these weapons fired in virtually every engagement. Major Bernard Ferguson, commanding one of the Chindit columns, wrote in his after-action report dated May 1943 that despite crossing numerous rivers, fighting through bamboo forests, and operating in constant rain, his unit experienced only 2 Bren stoppages in 3 months of operations. Both were ammunition-related, not mechanical failures. The Bren's accuracy mattered tremendously in jungle fighting. Engagements happened at close range, often without warning. The ability to put aimed fire on a target immediately, without the spray-and-pray approach of higher-velocity weapons, saved lives. Soldiers learned to fire short, precise bursts, 2 or 3 rounds, rather than long strings of automatic fire. The Bren's gentle recoil and slow cyclic rate made this kind of fire control natural. A well-trained Bren gunner could drop single shots on specific targets at 200 yards, a capability that astonished American observers when they first saw British and Commonwealth troops in action. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Bren had been in frontline service for 6 years. It had been tested in every environment imaginable. It had fired millions of rounds, and it was still the standard infantry section weapon for every British and Commonwealth unit that landed in Normandy. At 7:25 a.m., when the first British infantry sections came ashore on Sword Beach, each section had its Bren gunner near the front, weapon ready, spare magazines distributed among the riflemen. The fighting in Normandy's bocage country, those small fields surrounded by thick hedgerows and sunken lanes, demanded exactly what the Bren provided: accurate, controllable fire at short to medium ranges. German defenders had excellent positions, and the British infantry had to dig them out field by field, hedge by hedge. The Bren gunners provided covering fire for section advances, firing from bipods to keep German heads down while riflemen manoeuvred. Sergeant William Gray of the 1st Battalion, Hampshire Regiment, later described the advance toward Caen in late June 1944, noting that his Bren gunner, a Private Davies, fired over 600 rounds in a single afternoon on June 26th, changing barrels 4 times, and never experienced a stoppage. The Germans continued to capture and use Brens whenever possible. A captured German document from Normandy, dated July 15, 1944, instructed units on the proper use of British LMG 303 and emphasized that captured weapons should be turned in to company headquarters for reissue rather than kept by individual soldiers. The Wehrmacht designated it the Leichte MG 138E, light machine gun 138 English type. Ammunition was compatible with captured British rifles, making the logistics simple. Some German units in Normandy ended up with substantial numbers of Brens, particularly after the fighting at Villers-Bocage and Caen, where British equipment losses were heavy. The contrast with German machine gun doctrine was striking. German infantry tactics centered on the MG-34 and later the MG-42, belt-fed weapons with high rates of fire that provided the base of fire for the squad. German riflemen supported the machine gun. British doctrine was different. The Bren supported the riflemen. It was a squad automatic weapon, not a true machine gun. This meant British infantry sections were more flexible, could operate more independently, and didn't collapse as completely when the automatic weapon was knocked out. As the war in Europe ground toward its conclusion in early 1945, the Bren had become so ubiquitous that soldiers barely thought about it. It was simply there, reliable as sunrise. During the crossing of the Rhine on March 23, 1945, British infantry went over in Buffalo amphibious vehicles, and every section had a Bren gunner positioned to provide suppressing fire during the landing. In the industrial fighting through the Ruhr Pocket in April 1945, where combat happened building by building, the Brens' accuracy allowed gunners to fire through windows and doorways without wasting ammunition on masonry. Meanwhile, in Burma, the 14th Army was driving the Japanese back toward Rangoon. The monsoon season of 1945 was particularly severe, with some positions receiving over 40 inches of rain in May alone. Weapons corroded, equipment failed, but after-action reports from divisions engaged in the final offensive consistently noted that Bren guns remained operational even when other weapons failed. The gun's design, with its easily removable parts, its simple gas system and its robust construction, meant that even in the worst conditions, a soldier with a rag in a few minutes could keep it functioning. The war ended in Europe on May 8, 1945, and in Asia on August 15, 1945. By that time, British factories had produced approximately 450,000 Bren guns. Commonwealth factories added another 180,000. The weapon had served in every theatre, in every climate, in every type of combat from jungle ambushes to urban warfare. It had been dropped by parachute, carried by mountain troops mounted on vehicles, and fired from defensive positions. It had been praised by soldiers and coveted by enemies. What made the Bren work where other weapons failed? The answer lay in that original decision at Enfield in the 1930s to maintain impossible tolerances, to machine each part to specifications that seemed excessive, to prioritize quality over quantity. The weapon was expensive to produce, nearly 3 times the cost of a Sten submachine gun, but it never wore out. Guns manufactured in 1938 were still in service at war's end, having fired hundreds of thousands of rounds. The gas operation was brilliantly simple. Gas tapped from the barrel drove a piston, which drove the bolt carrier, which rotated and withdrew the bolt. There were no complicated linkages, no fragile parts, no finicky adjustments. When the gun stopped firing, you could look at it and immediately see what was wrong. Usually it was an empty magazine. The few stoppages that did occur were almost always ammunition-related, defective rounds or dirt in the magazine, rather than mechanical failures. The curved magazine, which looked so awkward, was actually a necessity. British .303 ammunition was rimmed, meaning each cartridge had a protruding rim at the base. Rimmed cartridges don't stack straight. They need to curve to feed reliably. That distinctive shape that soldiers mocked was actually careful engineering solving a real problem. The magazine held 30 rounds, which was generous for the era, and the straight-line configuration of the magazine meant that the gunner could see exactly how many rounds remained. German gunners with belt-fed weapons sometimes didn't realize they were out of ammunition until they tried to fire. Perhaps most importantly, the Bren was a weapon soldiers trusted. In combat, when your life depends on your weapon functioning, trust matters more than any technical specification. British infantry knew that if they maintained their Bren, and maintenance was simple, it would fire when they needed it to fire. That confidence affected tactics, morale, and outcomes. A soldier with a weapon he trusts fights differently than a soldier who wonders whether his gun will jam at the critical moment. After the war, the Bren remained in service for decades. It was converted to 7.62mm NATO in the 1950s and served through the Falklands War in 1982. Some countries still use Bren guns today, nearly 90 years after the design first emerged from Czechoslovakia. The weapon that British soldiers initially mocked for its ungainly appearance became one of the longest-serving military firearms in history. In the end, the story of the Bren is the story of engineering done right. It's about choosing reliability over flash, accuracy over volume of fire, quality over quantity. It's about a weapon that worked when working mattered most. In the sand of North Africa, the mud of Normandy, the jungles of Burma, and every desperate firefight in between. German soldiers who tried to steal it understood something that transcended nationality or ideology. In war, you want the weapon that won't fail you. The Bren was that weapon. Not because it was flashy or modern or impressive in specifications, but because when soldiers pulled the trigger, it fired. Every time. That was enough. That was everything.